Do we know exactly who we are as a business, where we want to go as a business, and how do we start making improvements? If we're doing AI, it's got to elevate the human to human interaction because we're a people services business.
Welcome to Builders, Budgets, and Beers. I'm Reece Barnes, and I started this podcast to have real conversations about money in the building industry, the wins, the mistakes, and everything in between. I believe builders deserve to feel confident about their finances, and that starts by hearing from others who've been through it too. This industry can be slow to change, but the right stories and the right tools can make profitability feel possible. Let's get into it. All right, Dustin, mics are hot. We're rolling.
Great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick the episode off just with a light introduction and maybe, a little too long didn't read background on yourself. We can start there.
Okay. Yeah, for those of you, the audience who are not aware, don't know me, my name is Dustin Stephens. I'm the CEO of Alliance Solutions Group. We're based out of Sarasota, Florida. We 20-year, serving the construction industry where we, implement ERPs, connect systems between operations, pre-construction, post-construction, HR, payroll, a variety of different things, that we bring in to help our client base with their tech stack. I myself, I've been at this role for 4 months now, but before that, I was at Sage for 13 years. Supporting Alliance, though, as this transition moving into CEO has been fairly smooth because I've known the team and worked with them for the past 13 years on working with them at Sage and helping them support the construction industry clients. And then as far as my background, further than that, I've been in the construction industry. I'm going to sound old now for 31 years. So,
13, you're an old vet. You're an old vet.
I'm an old vet. So that's from carrying a tool belt, working on construction job sites, as working in building envelope construction, and then moved into working for large building materials manufacturers, construction companies, and, now in the tech space.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you started your career bags on. You are a hammer swinger.
Yeah, I was on a podcast one time, and I haven't really told many people this, but my first day in construction was not the funnest. They had me go on the roof line, put up some of the flashing, and I had the wrong hammer at the time. And my very first swing of the hammer, I smashed my thumb and blood everywhere. So it was a fun start to the journey.
Wait. So was that the motivation to get out of the field and into more of the business side of construction?
Well, yeah. Well, I got better at swinging a hammer, thankfully. But it was more probably the winters, shoveling the snow off just to get, started on the project and freezing all the time. I'm like, you know what, there's got to be another way I can stay in the construction industry. So that was totally a bigger reason to move away from doing the hands-on, but I still miss it. Try to do stuff every once in a while, but I think, if you lose it, you lose it. But I hang my own pictures up.
There you go. Wait, where are you from? Where are you out of with the snows in the winter?
That was in Utah. So
in
Utah, Colorado, New York. Now I'm based out of Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, there you go. A lot of seasons for you throughout your career. Well, that's great. Okay, so then from the construction side, I'm curious to hear more about your journey because I think what you guys are doing over at Alliance makes a ton of sense, and certainly want to dig into that a little bit more. But just how did you kind of piece your career together, and how did you make those moves, and what were some of the biggest pieces that you took away from each one of those steps?
Oh, I totally planned this out when I was 17.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because what's the saying? How do you make God laugh? Tell him your plans.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's a good one.
I just, started off, I was, working my way through college, needed to pay for college, needed a job, happened to have my brother-in-law had a construction company. So that's how I got initially into construction. Like I said, just after graduating, wanted to get into, more of a different side of things. So went into, actually it was the company that I installed their building materials. They hired me and being, getting into sales. And it's funny that, I kind of learned that, I would downplay, when I go to these calls that I was actually a construction worker because I didn't think anyone wanted to know that and trying to get into doors. But the moment I made some comments, they're like, oh, you actually we're installed, you were in construction. Okay, well, I'll talk to you. But yeah, this, interesting to know the respect that people give
Sure.
who've been in the trenches with them, if you so to speak. So just moving, my career just naturally progressed. I just think like most people, we're ambitious, as we, you know, grow into a role, we got that imposter syndrome to start, then you start seeing some success, and then you get into where you're like getting some wins, and now you're a little bit bored, and you're like, yeah, what's next? And you start
Yep.
that again, and you're like, why did I just do this to myself? But we just learned to accept, hey, you always got to keep progressing.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Okay, cool. Well, and that's that's a big part of the reason why I was excited to have you on the show, because I think that type of background, you going from the field, now you're, the chief executive at, Alliance Solutions, is like, you've got a lot of perspective. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned over my nearly 10 years in the space is, our consumer, right? The contractors, they appreciate people that have actually lived and been in their world. You called it, right, being in the trenches with them. So obviously, you had a hell of a run at Sage. You're obviously just going at Alliance. What would you say is like the general theme or the message that you think there needs to be more conversation around in construction? And it could be construction tech, but just over your career, what would you say that big theme would be?
I would say, yeah, especially in the world we see now, is you just hear nothing about AI. It's innovation. It's in. You could argue, construction now is totally different than when I first started. When it comes to how we bid projects, what construction, how do we connect the back office to the field, and those are just you need those things now just to survive. And now it's this big push for how do we use AI, because it's especially relevant in the construction space because, as we were talking before earlier, for, the latest stats we've seen, for every 7 that retire out, we're only getting replaced by 1. So you're just going to have, innovation's going to happen because you just don't have enough bodies to do the job. And totally. So on top of all that, you've got, especially when it comes to back office, most companies are still on 40, 50-year-old tech. They're not even in the cloud. And we're, so take AI, like, we got to get to the cloud first, and then so all the cloud across all your systems, and so you can take advantage of that AI game.
Did you say 40 or 50-year-old tech? Who's the 40, 50-year-old solution out there still?
Sage Timberline.
Is it really that old?
Timberline. Sage acquired Timberline back in 2004, but Timberline started here in Portland, Oregon, where I am.
Yeah.
1971.
Dang. Okay. I had no, and actually that's crazy. It's like, no, I'm even dating myself and I'm a 30-year-old guy, but it's like in 1970s, that's 50 years ago now, which is crazy. But
hearing how they would go and just say, hey, you need, this is why I can, you need these computer systems. It was interesting listening to the veterans in that era, how they had to go and start selling into this space. Construction, accounting, that is.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there's still there's definitely that conversation, around like the construction vertical being, laggards or late adopters when it comes to technology. While I personally don't see that being the case. And even as of recently, definitely seeing more of an uptick in an interest in adoption, getting cutting edge technology like large language models, agentic AI, stuff like that applied into their business. But that was one piece. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're seeing some really amazing stuff in the pre-construction space with BIM, that's been around for a while now, and operations. Now we're getting into what, the back office accounting.
Totally. Well, and I think that's where I was going to go. I think what was it? It was like for every 7 that leaves, what is it, like 1, 2 comes to backfill them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's like there's like definitely the need there, but I think where like the most interesting, what are the most interesting areas in the business to start applying technology? You obviously mentioned, the back office workflows, but you also mentioned pre-con. Like, what are you bullish on? What do you think is the big move and where contractors should be looking at applying technology?
Well, I could take it from actually what the top contractors are saying. We've at Sage, when put on my old Sage hat, we would sponsor a survey with AGC every year. I'm sure you probably did a podcast on this, but where we would interview around 1,400 of the top construction firms across the U.S. and look at, hey, what do you see as outlook? What sectors, retail, energy, whatever. Where are you going to invest in? What are you seeing? What's the economic outlook? And also in technology, we list of all the different technologies. What do you do? is there any that rise to the top where you're looking to reinvest or invest further in? And the top 5 was AI, accounting,
Yeah.
document management, estimating, and project management. Those were the areas that they said that, hey, this, most of them, they started the project management going into the cloud first. With companies like Procore, they were on the leading edge with that.
Mm-hmm.
Estimating, that's another one where Sage is the 800-pound gorilla in the estimating space, but that's an old product, and I know they've launched their new cloud product and they're moving that to the cloud. So, but
Mm-hmm.
on the design piece with what Autodesk and others do, that's where they've done some really cool stuff with AI, especially or others with digital takeoff. What you can do, you can bid plans, and so it gives the company a hell of a lot better chance to win jobs, because the more you can bid, the more bids you get out, and the more bids you get out accurately, obviously, the more you can win. And so some of the AI that they can do to take those digital takeoffs to an estimate quicker than normal.
Totally. Okay, so I mean, it's like really like spreading the gamut. Tell me a little about Alliance Solutions and like what you guys are doing, because I think on that thread of where contractors need to be looking at applying technology and just with you mentioned earlier AI being such a big conversation, I'm hearing obviously interest in AI, but kind of the bigger conversation is how applicable is it? Right? Like, what is it actually doing? Is it driving a meaningful result or driving meaningful reduction in time spend? What are you guys doing at Alliance Solutions Group? And then we can talk about some of those specific solutions that you're seeing that are driving those meaningful results.
Yeah, so Alliance, like I said earlier, we've been around for over 20 years now, have about 4,000 customers in the construction space. We're not like other, similar companies in our space where they, hey, we're just going to do accounting systems across a variety of different industries. We've made a decision that we're going to be highly focused on one particular industry, and we're going to be the best that we can be across the full construction life cycle. How can we help them with our tech stack across the pre-construction, the buyout, the actual construction going on, post-construction service work, and then all feeding into the back office, accounting, financials, HR, payroll, analytics, all that. So we want to be able to, hey, here's your entire tech stack. How can we help support you in the best? Obviously, when it comes to accounting, we've partnered with Sage. We feel like that's the best of the best as far as the accounting solution. And then how do we work with you on what's the right operational solutions, pre-construction solutions that's right for your business? And so we help guide them through that. And one is just, let's get all of your systems in the cloud, get your systems connected. So eliminate some of these silos or swivel chairs. You're not having to get into multiple different applications, but if we can get them talking to each other, operation, so your project manager in the field can be in their operation solution. They can get the WIP reports and all the job costs and everything that they know of progress on their specific job. And then the CFO who's taking the stuff can be in the accounting system and all those the data flow. So we help that customers in that creating that tech stack, and how do we integrate systems for them.
Totally. Okay, cool. Well, and you mentioned like even just something as rudimentary of like get everything onto the cloud, right? There's a lot of chatter. You mentioned like TimberScan and older products like that. I'm in the CFMA forums, and there's still people talking about on-prem solutions versus going into the cloud. What's your general take on that? And, well, it might be obvious, but like, what's your general take? And then do you think there's like any validity in terms of potential resistance for contractors wanting to stay on-prem as opposed to in the cloud?
Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but I have a hard time getting out of Excel on my own desktop. So it's
right.
I think there is that resistance. There's you look at, say, potentially Timberline. It's been developed for 50 years, and the feature functionality is very, very rich. Like, it's got more functionality for construction than anyone needs. It's just, it doesn't have those latest and greatest, the value you get from being in the cloud. And so, and then there's a rush now with some publishers trying to create that next gen cloud, but it's going to take a moment to catch up to that functionality. But I think we're just around that corner where it's starting to catch up, and then it's just going to be a wave of customers moving into the cloud for construction. Because right now, most of what we're seeing is there was a pent up demand. Construction companies on QuickBooks that are 70, 80 million in annual revenue. You're like, wow, but they're just, they wanted to go to that next gen cloud. And so when they saw, hey, Sage is making a move. And so that's what we're seeing a lot of people, they need to graduate into a more sophisticated construction specific accounting solution.
Totally. Okay. So like really that resistance is most simply explained is a lack of functionality and feature in these new, more modern pieces of software. And that's what the
I would say
contractors want.
that was in the beginning, and you're up to the point where it's close enough where at this point it's just hey, what's is it resistant to change, or I'll do it when I'm less busy. A lot of it, honestly, is I'm about to retire. As soon as the next person comes in, I'll let them make that move to the cloud. Or hey, there's the founders, retiring, and then the new generation, their kids are taking over the company and they want their own new cloud software. So that's a big catalyst as well. Or a new CFO goes to another company and they want to implement something that they're familiar with, or take the company to a new level.
Totally. Okay, cool. Well, and so with that said, is next generation coming in, the previous owners, or the owners that are about ready to phase out, they're kind of like, hey, like, we'll let this next generation make those decisions. There might even be a component of like, hey, I don't even want to like vet this stuff out, right? I don't even want to just start that process, so we'll just let them do it. Obviously at Alliance, you're talking about Sage, but what are some of those more cutting edge products that you're looking for? Because I mean, you talked about project management, you talked about pre-con, you talked about obviously Sage being the accounting side, but what are you seeing being really those compelling solutions that are piquing the interest of contractors that are solving really valuable problems?
I would say the operations piece. Whether you're doing new construction in the field, you need that collaboration tool for your project managers and getting the data they need to run their projects.
Totally.
And progress billing, and connect the back office. So that was really that was the start. Lead to charge. With Procore, like I mentioned before. There's been some really cool stuff, new technology spend in the pre-con space with digital takeoffs and estimating solutions. And then the post operations, there's a lot of, you see the build ops and the Sage field operations, and, service titans of the world doing some really cool stuff in operations. And it just seems to be, now it's, and we talk to our customers every single day, like, hey, where are you on this journey to get, all of your solutions into the cloud? And some are like, hey, they're bullish and they want to start immediately. Others like, hey, maybe it's a couple of years later, which is great. And we can say, hey, well, let's talk to you about a path. Is your operations in the cloud? Is this like, let's start with these solutions. And if your ultimate goal is to go here and with this ERP in the cloud, let's make sure that as we build out these surrounding solutions that will be integrating, that you will have that integration path so you can eliminate. So we could just you don't want to disrupt the company too much, but just like, hey, let's start with one particular area that's critical to them.
Of course. Okay. Well, and this might be, it depends type answer, but I mean, just of all of the customers that you guys talk to and the conversations that you have, what would your advice be to the contractor that's feeling overwhelmed with all these new solutions, right? Potentially looking at a very legacy tech stack, knows they need to go, hopefully they're already on the cloud, but potentially going onto the cloud or starting to apply more AI. Where should they start? Like, how should they start evaluating which function or which process or which software they should start applying? Because like you said, there's a ton of different directions you could go.
Yeah. And then honestly, put yourself in their shoes and be empathetic to this. Is not, it's not simple, and you can't be too disruptive to the business and do it all at once. And the reason I say that is I've got a dose of my own medicine now, taking over as CEO at Alliance, where, now you can't turn around without hearing the word AI. And, what's, a lot, you hear the jokes when you see these different things on podcasts, like everyone's like, all right, embed AI, and then it doesn't go any further than that. Well, where and what and everything.
Exactly.
So, but it is critical. We got to be on the forefront of innovation. So I created a new role and organization within the team on strategic operations. So essentially, how do we overhaul our tech stack to be streamlined our operations with a heavy AI focus? And we got all excited about it as well. And they come back like, hey, it's going to cost us $1 million. I'm like, all right, well, that's obviously not going to happen. And we can't do all at once. We'll cripple a company. So
yeah,
for us, we just said, okay, well, what are we trying to solve? And we had to get really, really good at what is our business? How do we do from we're out engaging or we're out marketing in the market of like, hey, who we are, what do we do, how we help this construction industry to their prospecting. We close the deal, we turn them over to implementation, we turn them over to post go live, happy customers, customer advocacy. What are all the different steps involved, all the different departments involved? What are some of the how much are the tedious tasks? Where do we get the best gains for our money? And so we just had to get really strategic. But we started with, do we know exactly who we are as a business, where we want to go as a business, and how do we start making improvements ultimately that's going to improve the customer experience, our colleague experience. And then my thing is like, if we're doing AI, it's got to elevate the human to human interaction, because we're a people services business, and we want to unlock more time with our customers so we can have these face-to-face consultative conversations versus
Totally.
Doing a lot of the tedious work.
Totally. Okay. So, and that's just specifically through the lens of what you're seeing at Alliance.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Long story short, is like, so, that would be my advice is to, hey, if you look, where are you on this? And a lot of them are already doing it. We just had an event in San Francisco where we talked to a lot of current construction companies. They know what's coming too, and they're doing very similar things of like, hey, what do we have to do? And they're creating this roadmap to where they want to get to where they ultimately want to get to in their tech stack.
Totally. And that's where I wanted to clarify, like, this is Alliance, because that was going to be my next question. It's like, is this a playbook and a perspective that could be applied into the construction world? It's really just more like, how does the business, regardless of what vertical it is or what the product is, like, that's kind of how you can look at tastefully adopting AI.
Yeah. Ultimately, we could go back without the AI, like, hey, here's a good tech path that, we think just because we have 4,000 clients and what we would recommend, or you can go talk to other people that are experts in the business as well. But the AI, is fairly new for everybody, and everyone, there's what's the best solutions? What's the risk? Do we have when we use AI, when we wouldn't use AI? Those type of things that we're even going through, and it's a huge initiative for us to become experts ourselves and adopt it. And that would be great. Like, hey, here's a better roadmap. Here's what we did, and help guide them through that. But
totally,
we're definitely working on.
That's awesome. Okay. And so obviously that's something you're working on, but you'd mentioned that you put the strategic ops person in place. Is that, like, tell me a little bit more about that role. And is that a role that construction companies, obviously depending on the size of the organization, like, does that overhead make sense? But like, is that a role that you would advise larger contractors to do, is like, strategic ops, this person focuses on this, and they kind of start going through the mapping of their journey as a business from prospect to advocate customer, and they can start identifying these workflows to apply AI, and they're going to really move the needle.
Absolutely. And I just had a conversation with one of our clients last week where they're a fairly larger firm, and maybe that's where they're starting and they can afford the investment, but hired a chief information officer where they're, hey, technology is critical to us. It's not something that's just a nice to have. It's a must have to be able to compete. They saw it was worth the investment, and he's coming in like, hey, what is the ultimate tech stack that we want to do? How do you work with people like us to make sure that, provide them thought leadership, help out where they see potential weaknesses, fix those gaps, connect different solutions with them. And then also they've got contests of like, all right, here's some of the AI stuff, and like, hey, who's going to come up with the best? And they're kind of like gamifying it, putting it, this is their strategy of like, let's get some AI in the hands of people that are more tech savvy in the company and see what happens. And, that was one of their strategies.
Totally. I mean, I'm hearing something very similar, when we are talking to, the C-level, VP level, and, from a leadership standpoint, the more forward-thinking contractors are saying, we know it's coming, but we need to evaluate the market and see what it is. And then they're tasking the individuals that are going to be closer to those actual flows to go out and start evaluating. So I think even if you don't have, the room on, your P&L for a strategic ops person specifically, there are things that you can do, and you don't have to be to a certain point or a certain revenue benchmark as a company to start delegating this out to your team and start getting their perspective on, okay, what is the potential with AI out there, and start looking at it more through the specifics in the business and their roles and how it gets applied.
Yeah, and it's I'm the same, because I'll get requests all the time like, hey, we want this software, we want this AI tool, and I'm like, all right, well, what's the business case? And then you have to go back like, okay, well, can you get to, hey, here's business as usual. This is all the hours spent in this particular task. We implement this. This is that's where it gets it. You have to really understand how much time you're spending on these things. What's the real cost, and what are you going to save by putting in potential expensive solution? Is it making the company better? Is it making your experience with your customers better, or your colleagues enjoying more of what they do because they're not doing less tedious stuff and doing more fun, impactful stuff?
Totally. And I mean, just like with the nature of this podcast, I mean, I talk a lot about like the financial side of things, the accounting side of things. What are, some of the triggers that you guys hear that would signal the contractor needs to start looking at AI for their back office or more of like their accounting financial flows? What are some of those pain points that are like a strong indicator that they should lean in and start evaluating solutions?
That's a good question. It's different. Seems to be different for everybody. Um, it depends on the person. There are people that are just generally late adopters. Hey, this works for me now. I don't trust AI, but it's fine. And then you have others that are, if we're not innovative, we're dying, and but it's not as easy to find those people. Or how do you get that trigger? Or a new CFO comes in who is more innovative mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Or just they've got to compete. They've lost some workforce. And what we need to. HR was never really something that they. When I first started, we never really talked to HR.
Totally.
We'll make sure you get paid, but now it's become imperative. It's critical to them. Like we need to retain our talent. We need to recruit the best talent, and we have to have solutions and tools in order to do that. And that's been a space that it's been fun to see, because it wasn't something that was really discussed in the construction market before.
Totally. Well, and like even how some of the things that I'm hearing and that our team is hearing is typically where this conversation starts is on like an AP side of things. And I think that's the obvious. And I would say it's the obvious because there's been the most like AP point solutions in place with AI, right? Like even just 5-10 years ago, it was like AI was optical character reading, right? And that was just like the big play there was like saving time on data entry, right? But that's usually the pain point that we hear, especially with these larger contractors that are processing thousands of AP documents a month, right? And that's just to your point, such a tedious, labor-intensive task. And there even is, depending on the organization, there's a lot of cross function collaboration that needs to happen. The back office gets an invoice. They need to know like, how is this categorized? What's our percent complete? Generally, like what the field context is. But even with it, like this really starting with AP, we do start to uncover, and the conversation really develops depending on where you're at in the org chart. Having that conversation is like, yes, there's a ton of upside to automating AP processes, right? And like creating faster, more accurate understanding on cost. But then when you really start to have a conversation with these people, typically going to be more AI forward, they really start to understand that like, okay, tracking AP and accelerating that process is nice from a, call it like an overhead reduction or reallocation conversation. But really when you can speed up your cost understanding and speed up your income understanding, your revenue, that's really starting to open up a conversation of how do we apply AI to automate WIP, right? And cash flow reporting, and starting to get into that funnel. I don't know if that's, if you guys are hearing that on your end, but it's starting to turn into more of a conversation, not just around like the AP cost tracking side of things, but their eyes are starting to open and they're starting to become more creative with, if AI can do this, then we can apply it here. Or this is a more holistic problem and we're starting with just the main issue at hand. What's your take?
Oh, absolutely. And if we could speed up those processes rather than looking at your P&L as that's a history lesson, like how do you get it to where it's a future?
Bingo.
Here's where you're going, and get to the point like, hey, now we're giving you insights of like what's going to happen to your business in 12 months and how you can make corrective actions now versus, oh crap, we just lost, after the fact when you close out the month.
Totally. I love that you did the history lesson on the P&L, because that's really what it is, right? And that's, I think, the best way, even just for the listeners, to like think about AI is like, I think there's just like the immediate friction or concern with like AI is going to take all of our jobs, right? But like that's like not really the case. I mean, if they're like tedious tasks, then like you might not have the business need for them, but that's not to say that like humans aren't adaptable, right? And they're not going to develop skills and impact the business in other ways. But with that said, it's when you think about AI, this is how I explain it to people. When you think about AI, it's more important to think, how can I shorten that timeline that it takes for me to understand the information and to arrive at the information that I actually want to make those business decisions? Exactly what you just said. It's, not looking out the rear view mirror. It's looking out the windshield, right? And preparing. Hey, look, we're underbilled on these projects. Hey, we need, we're missing change orders on this. Is going to impact our, our profit margin. Hey, if we apply AI to our billing agent, then we can get more income in the business and we're not, adding risk to the business. So,
yeah, and innovation's going to just keep hitting us. It's not the first time we've had, with the cloud or with, I just marvel at the times, what email didn't exist. You had to write letters. You had to, someone's got to type this up. The stuff, the productivity gains that we've had over the last 50 years or so is just amazing. And I was about to embarrass, maybe I will, but I remember talking to my nieces and nephews about school, and they have to do these research papers. I'm like, you can get one done in 30 seconds, where I had to spend weeks going up to the school libraries, printing stuff out, and holding my source. But yeah, anyway, but
hang on. No, but that's an interesting point, because I think there's a lot of that, like we're talking about, like even if it is like, if we're talking AP clerks, right? Or people that are just handling, like there's depth on that team and they're just handling these tedious tasks. What's your take on the importance of that role being performed in an organization for future talent to be developed, right? I guess to round this out to your example, talking to your nieces and nephews, right? Like they can crank out a paper using AI in minutes, right? But was the 2-week process that you and I were used to without AI, was that the important piece of like critical thinking, getting that firm understanding and developing that skill? And are we going to be bypassing that with AI? What's your take on that?
well, I could probably talk another 3 hours, because it's, one of my, not to nerd out on science fiction, but for those listeners who might, but the analogy is the same, but one of my, and it just happens to be out there, but I don't know if you've seen the latest Dune movies, but
I'm not a big movie guy. I should probably watch it.
Well, it's a book series that started in the 1960s, actually, but
okay.
What's not shown, if you're watching the movies out there, you don't see computers. You don't see AI anywhere. This is 20,000 years into the future. Reason
Sure.
being, in the book, when they wrote it in the 60s, the author saw this AI wave coming in the 60s. He called it thinking machines, but basically the theory he had was that in the book that it's going to make us soft. AI did take over the world. It got too soft, and then humanity, eventually had to fight them, and then they had to evolve and get, to your point, better at critical thinking, better at being our own personal computer, better at, just everything out there, not relying on AI thinking machines. And so, but if you read the book further along, the main, he gets to the point where you can't, and they tried to stop innovation, and then
Sure.
You can't stop innovation. The comments was, would you think in a world without birds, mankind wouldn't invent airplanes?
Sure.
Like
Totally.
coming. And so what we need to do is figure out a way to be better, and get better ourselves, involve ourselves to be better at that critical thinking. How we do that, I don't know. I guess we're about to find out, because it's so convenient on so many different tasks that you can do.
Totally. It's impossible to ignore it, right? And that's what, like, I love that, like, and if this is credit to Dune or just credit to Dustin, but it's like we wouldn't have airplanes if we didn't have birds, right?
And it's totally Dune, so it'll take that.
Yeah. Wait, is it Doom or Dune? It's Dune, right?
Dune, like it,
Yeah, that's like, what is it, like the Timothy Chalamet movie? Wasn't he in that? Yeah. Okay, yeah. See, I'm terrible at that kind of stuff. I'm not a big movie guy.
I'm not producing the movie, or not yet. I'm not up there selling the movie, but it is good.
Yeah, I don't know if Builders, Budgets, and Beers is that big of a podcast for us to get in trouble. but totally lost my train of thought. It was about birds, airplanes, innovation.
AI, how do we still get better and better?
Totally.
Because you don't grow without struggle. How do we still? Yeah, I don't know the answer, other than I completely agree with you. I think we still need challenge. We can't have it easy all the time. I'm sure that's going to happen no matter what, but I just don't.
Totally. And I think where I was going to go with this, and this is just kind of like a layup, association here, but it's like when Henry Ford came out with, the Model T, right? Mass producing vehicles. It was like, we were like largely like a horse dominated transportation, world, right? And then you get access to the cars, and it started out as like a luxury and less of a convenience, but more of a like, look what I can do. And then it just like that paved the way for vehicles to be such a huge part of this. But it's not like we just like all these people that were blacksmiths like doing horseshoes and like stuff around supporting the horse industry, right? They just like disappeared. They just moved into different functions.
So industries took over.
Exactly. It created other opportunities. Now, like, I think there's a lot of paranoia about like AI and like what's going to really be the need there. But I do see, I had Julie Adams on the podcast. We were talking about that like the obvious is you need to apply AI into the business. But then when you even take a step back and what industries are like extremely insulated from this is AI requires a lot of construction in order for AI to be a conversation, we've all read the articles about the billions, trillions of dollars getting dumped into data centers and all the construction related around that, the power plants and stuff like that. But that's also going to build more community, right? Like you look at these places that they're putting the data centers, and it's impossible to ignore that they're going to create thriving communities that were probably like really small, like maybe not hard to find work, but hard to find like high value work in those areas. So maybe this is just like the blind optimist in me, but I think, with all of the, advancement that we're making, there's still going to be plenty of room for humans. They're just going to be in roles that we have never even thought about yet.
Oh, absolutely. And even in construction, when one industry might be slow, others take off. It's a pretty, well-diversified industry that's protected in some ways outside of 2008. But I don't know. I think about it. There's probably a lot of doom and gloom when something innovative comes out, like say the printing press. People are like, oh, no, people are going to be, the ruling people at the time, like people are going to be too smart, and what's that going to do? And but look what's happening and how technology just skyrocketed after we educated more of our people. So I would imagine AI is going to do the same.
Totally.
My optimist in me as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think you have to be. And I mean, I think like, just generally, especially in the United States, like there's a lot of like negativity around, a lot of division, and I think, you can find some peace in, focusing on the optimistic side of things, and just like, you can't stop innovation, right? Like AI adoption is not slowing down. It's only speeding up. So, keeping a clear head on this and thinking like, okay, how can I actually make my world more efficient?
Exactly.
But,
yeah. And
go ahead.
Right. It seems the division a lot is on people's phones looking through screens versus outside and just start talking to people. It's not what you're seeing in the phone. It's
totally.
Yeah. It's like
I agree.
It's not fear and gloom.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, before we wrap up, I mean, you've got, over a 30-year career in the space, from all the way from being, bags on, a hammer swinger, going up into, the material side of things, the tech side of things, the service side of things. If you just had like one piece of advice or one message, and this can be as biased as you want, no shame. Like, what do you think is the most important thing for contractors to consider about their business, and why they should take that into consideration?
Well, one thing I have to say is thank you, because I think they don't get enough credit for what this infrastructure they build, that we have this nice, amazing life that we live, and they do a very hard job. So one, thank you that they've got into this industry and they're helping us make a better world. But yeah, I would say just going back to like dive into innovation, don't let it scare you. Be optimistic about that, as we said, and take your time, do it strategically, understand your business. Where do you want to go? What do we want to be? What's our values and how we adopt this new technology? Are we helping our people, our customers, and making the world a better place? And just have some rules and guidelines that work for you in that endeavor.
Beautiful. I love it. Now I'm going to ask you to shamelessly plug and tell the listeners how they can get in contact with Alliance Solutions Group, if they're ready to, or they need help navigating that journey. How can they get a hold of you guys? Where can they find you?
Well, Google's always a great place. Alliance Solutions Group. You can look Google. There's all of our information. You can contact us, watch some demos, and we can get in contact with them, interact with our website. They can email me, Dustin. Well, that was my old email.
Here we go.
The Sage email. That's not going to go through, but dstevens@alliance-sg.com.
Awesome.
Love to talk to them.
Yeah, beautiful. No, Dustin, it was an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate you jumping on and sharing your perspective and all the wisdom that you've gathered over your career. And yeah, I appreciate you jumping on the pod. We'll connect soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Reece.
You bet.